Hi, APUSH, it's Mrs. Zimnick. I'm going to take you through some important information on industrialization and also lead into the growth of unions. I have a separate video I'm going to do on some of the major strikes and union movements. So I thought we'd start with industrialization here and kind of see how some of this triggered the formation or really strengthening of labor unions. So I know what you might be thinking. Yawn, 1890s. Can we please get to the 20th century? Nothing important happened here. Hold up, slow your roll. There's a lot of important things that happen here. And really, I want you guys to understand that a lot of the arguments and the issues we're facing today have echoes back here in the past. Okay, so what do we want to do with business? How do we encourage growth while still making things fair for small businesses, startup businesses? How do we ensure that we'll be on the forefront of manufacturing without exploiting certain groups of people or certain workers? How do we make sure wages are fair? You guys think about minimum wage, think about the debates we're having today. A lot of them have the roots back here. So let's break it down. Let's walk through it. So why does industry spread really rapidly after the Civil War? There's a reason, okay? We know that really in units 4, 5, and 6, we're so focused on the coming Civil War that I think everybody knew was coming. And so industry is going to definitely slow down in the 1860s and 70s because we're in Civil War and Reconstruction. So what we're seeing now after the Civil War is we always had a lot of resources, but now we've got an expanding population, right? The war is over. People will start immigrating again. No one's immigrating to a place where Civil War is happening. That's not really a good plan. So we're going to see a new wave of immigration. We're going to see favorable government policies, and a lot of this has to do with the fact that the Republican Party will be solidly in control. And the Republicans were before and now are going to be stronger in the Northeast, right? They're going to be definitely the more business-friendly party, and I would say that that's really kind of still, I would say, a characterization of them today, that they're in general going to be in favor of more pro-business policies. There's going to be an inflow of capital into the country. There's going to be new technology coming in, the Bessemer process, right? Steel is going to be sort of the wave of the future for a lot of places, including Cleveland. So we've got a lot of local ties here. Transportation and communication will improve even more with the advent of things like the telephone, the radio becoming accessible. So we're really seeing a lot of changes. So what we see are some new types of business combinations that are going to emerge after the Civil War. You've got trusts and you've got mergers, and we still see this today. Trusts is where one large group holds the business in interests of another person, another group. A merger combines two or more organizations. And really prior to 1890, we're going to see there's very little stopping this from happening. And we still can have mergers, right? Time Warner comes to mind. I'm sure we could think of some other ones, but now there's going to be definitely some regulations in place, and there's going to be some things making it at least a little more of a level playing field for the small businesses. What we really start to see is that small businesses have a hard time competing in this environment back here. So new combinations, new ways to strengthen your business. We've got horizontal corporation and vertical corporation. So Rockefeller and Carnegie are going to sort of be the masterminds of this. Horizontal corporation means you buy up all your competition. So this is what John Rockefeller will do with Standard Oil. He will go into Western Pennsylvania, parts of Ohio, and he will buy these small oil refining companies where then, of course, when he buys them, he is at the mercy or the will if he wishes to fire whoever's there, replace them with workers he likes or his friends in the management positions, and kind of incorporate them under the large umbrella of Standard Oil. So this is how Rockefeller makes such a huge empire. Vertical corporation is when you buy up every single part that goes into your final product. So Carnegie does this with Carnegie Steel, based in Pittsburgh. Hey, Pittsburgh Steelers. There we go. Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. So there's some ties there too. So my example I always give with vertical corporation is it's kind of like if we're going to use, for instance, the meat producing industry. You would buy the cows, right? You would own the ranching industry. Then you would own the refrigerated railway cars that take your meat to the packing house. Then you would own the styrofoam today, the styrofoam and the plastic wrap that goes into making that meat that gets then put on the shelves. You own every single piece to the final product. So these are ways that you can really build your empire. And again, you have to think about at this time, there's really no rules or regulations stopping that. So they're not doing anything illegal when they're building these empires, right? But we're going to get to the point where people are going to start to say, is that fair? Railroads are our first big business in the United States. So you really want to understand that. We know that that was going on before the Civil War. It's going to explode after the Civil War. Look at these statistics, okay? These are some people that are going to be really integral in the railroad industry. So you might recognize some of those names. Well, you probably recognize Vanderbilt, Leland Stanford, is another one. And they are going to create universities essentially in their name, where they're going to push for, really no surprise there, their business model to be a big part of the education at that university. So we'll see that. You guys are going to read an article by Zinn who sort of calls that out and says what he thinks that is. So we'll think about that. We really didn't have any time zones until 1883, and there's a reason. Like, why would you need that? Right? Like, why does it matter? You can't talk to anybody in another time zone. You don't need to coordinate shipping really or anything. Now you do. Now you need to call people another time. You need to call people across the country. We've got the telephone. We've got railroads, and it's really important if railroads are on the track at the same time going in the same direction, the opposite direction. That's going to be a huge problem. So we start to see standardization for travel. We also start to see for the first time, really, the Sears Roebuck Company will put out a widespread catalog that will sweep the whole United States. So you're really starting to see that the United States as a market is coming together, okay? So we're going to look at, in class, we're going to talk about the men who built America. That is what the History Channel kind of referred to as these guys. We're going to crown one of them what I call Mr. Man Who Built America. And we'll look at the good and maybe the questionable things that were done by these people. So the Bessemer process, you might remember from world history, it's a cheaper way to make steel from iron. It's going to really put Pittsburgh and Cleveland on the map. So Pittsburgh and Cleveland are both industrial towns, right? And this is no shock to us. But you look at this picture and you're like, all right, looks like when I'm on the way to Progressive Field and I'm driving down I-90. But I have a friend who came from Salem, Oregon to visit me and had never been to Cleveland. And she teaches APUSH out there. And she was like, her eyes were just huge. It was hilarious. Everywhere she looked, she was like, oh my gosh, look at the bridges. Oh my gosh, look at the factory. And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, we don't have any of this in Oregon, like we're not an industrial town. She's like, this looks like a page out of the Industrial Revolution textbook. And I'm like, yeah, I know, that's kind of our thing. So you can see how that's really going to create some of these industrial cities and bring a tremendous amount of wealth to these cities. And that is true, right? We have to look at the contributions that John Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, Andrew Carnegie, and how all three of them will really give back a lot of their wealth. That was something that was really important, especially to Carnegie, in the form of libraries and things like that. But they definitely amassed unbelievable wealth and power. And we'll start to see some people at first kind of look away from that, because they're like, well, life's getting good and we're getting a lot of things out of this. But as the Gilded Age goes on, people will start to question that and say the call for regulation will grow. So monopolies we're going to see are really going to be a big thing. And again, prior to 1890, there's really nothing stopping monopolies. So we've got Standard Oil here. We got J.P. Morgan's Chase Bank today. If you look at your statement, very small at the bottom, it's going to say J.P. Morgan Chase. He is still making money off of us, you guys. If you have an account in Chase Bank, you're paying J.P. Morgan. And Andrew Carnegie with Carnegie Steel. So the railroad really cuts into all these industries, right? So if you can control the railroad, you're going to have, in some ways, a say in everything that goes on. So Bell and Edison, we talk about technology changing. Can't stress enough what the telephone is really going to do as far as communication, and therefore by connecting people and businesses together. Edison comes up with a lot. I always have a Nikola Tesla fan in the house who's going to be like, Nikola Tesla gets no love. He's the one that made the light bulb. I will say, at least for our intents and purposes, we tend to give that credit to Edison. So sorry, Tesla fans in the house. I'm sure you're still mad at me. But Edison is the one that really gets that patent for that incandescent light bulb, and that's going to change the way we live and work in the cities. So it's going to make our light sources a lot safer. Before it was kerosene, and a lot more reliable, and just make people able to work after it's dark. I mean, think about that. Right now in Cleveland, when I'm making this video, it's December 19th. It gets dark at like 4:45. So that's going to really change the way we live and work. Okay. Competition and monopoly. Again, there's really no calls to regulate this until we get to the late decade of the Gilded Age. So John Rockefeller controls, at his height, 90% of the nation's oil by 1879. I mean, think about that. 90% of the oil, which is a huge part of what's making all of this industry work, is in the hands of one guy. You take John Rockefeller's wealth at its height, and the last statistic I could find, and I don't know how true this is, so don't quote me on this, but it's got to be close. He is worth 3.5 times what Bill Gates is worth today. I mean, we're talking wealth we can't even wrap our head around, So it's going to cut prices locally and force small businesses to close. There's going to be some bribery involved, there's going to be some cutthroat decisions made. And, but Rockefeller is really known for giving what our old book called meticulous attention to detail. He was very good at what he did, and that's why he's going to create this empire. So we really can see by 1900, okay, you've got Great Britain is the blue, France is red, Germany's the green, yellow is the United States. Look where we start. Look where we end. Started from the bottom, now we here. Yeah, I just did that. So anyway, bad joke, Mrs. Zimnick. I do not have a career singing. But you get what I'm trying to say. Look at how we surpass the other countries. We have become one of the strongest industrial countries in the world. That's good, right? Obviously. What's the bad? Well, we're going to see that there's going to be some who are saying, yeah, but at whose expense, right? At whose expense? There's a give and take here. So Americans are largely ambivalent, big 50-cent word there, to the negative side of this. And why? Well, because we're going to see really a strong support for laissez-faire, this rising materialism that's after the Civil War. People sacrificed so much during the Civil War and Reconstruction that materialism is really going to grow when the Civil War is over. And people love the fact that there's now being goods mass produced really at a cheap price, right? They're not going to question or wonder where those goods came from. So we're going to see this will set up really our next unit. There's already some people starting to write and start to say. So Carnegie's going to really be the one I mentioned before, giving back a lot of his profits. And he called this the gospel of wealth, okay? Because he was a pretty religious guy, and he definitely said, it is my responsibility to give my wealth back. And he is the reason that a lot of libraries were built. That was his thing. So Carnegie really, I guess, is the closer thing to a rags to riches story that we have out of these so-called robber barons, out of these men who built America. He did start as a relatively poor immigrant, really worked his way up, and he felt like libraries, he called them America's free public universities. He thought, what a great idea. You can go to a library, you can check out a book on anything you want, and you can better yourself. So he poured millions and millions and millions of dollars into creating libraries. And they're all over the place. We have some in Cleveland. I know when I used to live in Cincinnati, there's one right down the road from my apartment, had a plaque on it, said this library was a gift to the people of Cincinnati from Andrew Carnegie. So that was something. So we do see them giving back. But there's going to be some reformers in the press who are starting to, again, take kind of a far left tone. We're really going to see that. The growth of socialism is going to emerge here. And that's kind of I would say, worldwide trend during these years. So we definitely see some books and some things being written. Henry George writes Progress and Poverty in 1879, tries to expose what's going on with the working class. Edward Bellamy writes a book called Looking Backward, 2000 to 1887. And so this one, he starts his book in the year 2000 when he says, America is a total socialist utopia. And if people are like, thanks, Obama, I would remind you Obama's not president until 2009. So have to throw that in there. But anyway, so Bellamy says, okay, the United States is completely socialist. And how did we get there? So he paints a very favorable view of socialism, for sure. He's trying to sell people on socialism. Henry Demarest Lloyd writes Wealth Against Commonwealth, which he attacks Standard Oil. Lewis Hines is going to be known for taking these really powerful photographs, especially of child labor. And he's exposing the coal mining conditions for these kids as young as 5 and 6. Really, looking at their faces and just making that the focus. That's going to start to change people's minds. That is going to start to change people's minds. And we will see all parties really shift left in the early decades of the 1900s. Okay. So this is where we start to get into the formation of labor unions. I'm going to have another show where I'm really going to focus on this. Just kind of understand that unions are going to be the pushback. Okay, so when you get to this point, I'm going to go into this a little bit more in my other show specifically on labor unions. But I do want to kind of talk about how immigrant groups are really being targeted here. And we'll see that on the West Coast, it's really going to be a lot of the Chinese laborers who are coming in to build these railroads. And we really see some anti-Chinese cartoons that are pretty awful. And so we actually have, let me go back here, the Chinese Exclusion Act, our first specific law passed really to ban or take away the rights of an immigrant group here in this country. So this is not one of our shining moments, I would say. But immigration has been before and, is currently an issue that is pretty hotly debated over what people do we want to allow in. And when they're here, what do we expect of them and what rights will we grant them? So the Chinese Exclusion Act was really pushed for by the nicely sounding American Working Man's Party here on the West Coast. And don't be fooled. They're not really a nice party. They are very anti-Chinese. And so they're kind of putting out these real negative stereotypes and saying, oh, they're dangerous, right? They're going to take all our jobs. And so the Chinese Exclusion Act will not allow anyone of Chinese ancestry to be citizens for a long time. So this is a pretty negative thing that we see coming back. We'll talk a little bit more about the pushback against the so-called new immigrants coming from Southern and Eastern Europe, people escaping the Russian pogroms. We've got Jews trying to flee from that in the 1890s. We've got Italians trying to get out of the mess that the new Italy has created. We'll look at that in another show, but I want to end with this. Who stole the people's money? Do tell. 'Twas him. Look at the fingers. There's Boss Tweed. Everybody's pointing. What does this have to say about